Today we're going to be looking at theme.json. So last week we started to do a little bit here, and basically we just started to build out template parts, and we registered them in our theme.json file, and then that gives them a name that shows up in the user interface in WordPress when we're in the site editor, and it also kind of fixes them so that they're associated with a specific area, and there are 3 areas. Let me see if I can show you my actual hands here. 3 areas. One is header, one is footer, and one is general. So if a template part is associated with one of those things, then it will be kind of like general will always show everything, but header and footer should only show the template parts that are actually associated with those areas. So that means you're not seeing footer template parts in your header and vice versa. So that's that area. So we're not going to be doing anything in here today, though. Where we are going to be working is down here in settings. And this is going to be an adventure because we're going to be diving into we're going to be diving into the docs, which one of the things that we're going to find is, are there places where the docs can be improved? And my guess is yes, probably so. So what we'll do is make notes of where we could maybe make the docs a little bit better. Sometimes it might feel like it needs a major overhaul, and that never really happens. So we're going to be looking for small incremental improvements that we can make to make everyone's lives better as we try to figure out how to use all of this stuff. So, all right, let's get into it. So we talked about appearance tools a little bit last week, and we'll kind of dive into what that really means when we get over to the docs, and we're going to go see what other settings we can apply. The settings that I want to focus on first are what I call, or what are usually called, theme support settings. And these are going to be like toggles. They're either going to be true or they're going to be false. And then one other setting that I want to make sure we cover off on today is layout. And that one has a little bit of a special case. You're setting up the default values for widths of the content areas of your site. And so we're also going to be working on that. So let's move over to Chrome here. I'm going to close out some stuff that's not relevant to us. Okay. Let's go to developer.wordpress.org. And I will type that in as well. So maybe we can copy and paste it once I get into where we're going. So live reference, living. So I'm looking for the theme.json living reference. I know that I find it by searching for living reference. If you search for theme.json, then it's not the top result. Okay. Well, there's our first thing that can be improved. So I'm going to make a note of that. So if you search theme.json, you don't automatically get the most useful link up at the top of the search. So that is an area where I might be able to make a contribution, or anyone can, to see what we can do to make that this page here, living reference, rise to the top, because this is always going to be the absolute most up-to-date, if not complete. I don't already know, it's not really like goes deep. It doesn't necessarily go deep into the into all of the options that we have in theme.json, but it at least gives us a starting point. So I'm going to put this into chat. So if anybody wants to link to it, and then the way you get to it is by going to developer.wordpress.org and then the block editor handbook. And then you can either search, or you can go to reference guides, theme.json reference, and then theme.json living. So it's kind of buried a little bit. And I think the reason is that we have some other older theme.json documents that are linked to from the top level page. So, all right, so we've got this, and we're just kind of gonna let's talk about schema just a little bit. We have talked about it before, but if you're new now, schema just allows us to understand the rules of the road, as it were, for our JSON structure. So what can you put and where can you put it, and what works and what doesn't work. And then also there are some instructions included that can kind of give you some clues as to how each thing that you put into your theme JSON file is going to actually behave. So we include that, and we can zip back over here, and we can see that here we have schemas.wp.org trunk and then theme JSON. This is the actual schema URL for the trunk version of the schema. That means it's like updated as we go. It could be updated daily or more. So if you are using core WordPress without the Gutenberg plugin, you would not want to use trunk schema. You would want to make sure that you're using a schema that's appropriate for the version of WordPress that you're using. So in this case, it would have the URL into here. Let me find an example of that, because that is another thing. There's no mention of versions of the schema for core. Okay. And so let's see, I'm going to go into a different theme, and I think I accidentally hid a bunch of stuff that I did not want to hide. Well, that's a problem. Hidden items, there we go. Okay. I was trying to get this view down to only being able to see the things we were actually going to use. And that failed me. I did it wrong. So we'll fix it for next time. All right, so 2023. And then if we go into theme.json here, that's still using trunk. That's not good. Let's try 2022. And that one doesn't have a schema at all. Okay, so TT3 is using trunk schema. That seems like a bug to me. But maybe it's not. But I don't like the idea that we're giving out the schema that might not be accurate for the default theme of WordPress. So that will definitely at least involve a little bit of discussion. It would be a very easy fix. All right, let's do this. I do want to make sure that this is in here somewhere. So we're going to go on a little handbook journey, going to themes. And then we're going to go to block themes. So if you're using core WordPress, the theme handbook, and you're creating themes, the theme handbook is your go-to. You want to make sure that you're reviewing this. This is the official documentation for building themes. Always open for contributions. So there's a process you can go through to get involved in the documentation team, which would be at make.wordpress.org, maybe docs. Yeah, here we go. Make WordPress documentation. So if you'd like to get involved in helping to improve documentation in the WordPress project, this is your place to go. And there are meetings on Tuesdays, and all of that information is there. Meetings take place in Slack, the Make WordPress Slack. And we're going to keep going. Oh, post URL to chat. Yes. All right. So here we go. Paste that in. So that's the Make WordPress docs team. And then back over here, we have the Theme Developer Handbook. There we go. Alrighty, so we have our theme handbook, and we're going to go into the section that's specific to block themes. There's information about initial setup of a block theme, templates, and template parts. And where we're going to go in here is to theme.json. So here we have a piece here that says this is a complement to the how-to guide in the block editor handbook and to the theme.json reference. So admittedly, things are still a little bit spread out in terms about where you can go to find information about how to build block themes. And part of that is because we're still refining things. So I want to see if there's anything on this page about schema, and there is not. So I'm making a note that there's no mention of schema in theme handbook. So this is starting. I'm not sharing. Thank you for pointing that out. Let me get to the right place here. Okay, now I should be sharing. I am so sorry. It is one of those days. All right, so now we should see. All right, we should see comedy of errors today. Living reference. I also have the theme developer handbook to the theme.json page. And then what I mentioned before was make WordPress documentation. Okay. Now that it should be visible, and I'm gonna increase the text size a little bit so it might be a little easier for you all to see. Okay. So I am on the theme.json page. This is kind of turning into what can we fix in the documentation today. So that wasn't necessarily my plan, but that's where we're headed, it looks like. We'll see if we can get a little bit further along than that. I was hoping to see some information about schema in this page, but I just did a find in page and nothing came up. So it's possible that it's somewhere else in the docs, but initially I'm not finding anything. So yeah. So back over here in the living reference, there's one more place where some information lives about block themes, and specifically theme.json. This is like the original document here. Global styles and global settings and styles, and then theme.json in parentheses. This has been around since the beginning of theme.json, basically, and it's been refined over time, but it is the original document that we've had since I don't know, before 5.8, WordPress 5.8. So let's see if there's anything in here about schema. Okay, the naming schema of CSS custom properties. That's not the schema that I'm looking for. Okay, so here we have developing with theme.json. And again, we've only got a mention to the trunk version. All right, I think I know where I can find the URL structure of what this would look like, which would be in a plugin, actually. It's going to be in the Create Block Theme plugin. And then somewhere in here. Here we go. Okay, so now I'm kind of like deep in, so don't feel like you need to be following along here. All right, so here's where the structure is built. So we have the schemas.wp.org and then the theme.json version, which will actually be the WordPress version, and then theme.json. So instead of the word trunk here, we should have whatever version of WordPress we have installed. So let's try that. So basically, when you are in your theme.json file, okay, if I change this to 6.1, is that right? I hate it when I can't remember what version of WordPress we're on. Get into my site here. Yeah, 6.1. All right, 6.1. And it's only the major version, not the minor. All right, so now, before I do that, okay, let's say we want to see what is available to us. We can see this is all auto-completing. Use root padding aware alignments. That might be a good one. I'm not sure if this was in 6.1 or not. Oh, actually, I know for sure shadow, that's brand new. So if shadow goes away, then we'll know that we're seeing the correct thing when we change it. Okay. Get this back to valid. Okay, now I'm going to change this trunk to 6.1. And now when I do this, nothing happened. Okay, what did I miss? To pin that so it stays open. I'm going to go back into plugins. Okay, I missed this. There's a WP. Okay. Can't seem to get in here. Okay. Let's try that. There we go. And now I don't see shadow there anymore. So now it's pulling in the version of the schema that will work with WordPress version 6.1. So, so if you are building your own block theme and you are doing it with the intention of not using the Gutenberg plugin active, you would want to use the schema in this format where you have your version and then what version of WordPress it was created for. And then theoretically, if you're moving forward into a new version of WordPress and bringing in new features and working with theme.json to edit it, you would want to update the schema so that it's using this version. One thing to note though is that if you don't go in here and update it, it isn't like you're losing access to the newer features. It just won't autocomplete and give you tooltips and all of that for those new things when you're working with this file in a code editor. So it's really just a development tool. It's a helper as you're building these files out. so that you don't have to remember everything, which clearly I don't, since I have to go and look everything up as I go along. So for me, my life is all about knowing where to find things and not actually remembering what the things are. So, alrighty, so now we're going to go back to trunk here because we are using the Gutenberg plugin. And we want to go back to our living reference here. And let's look and see what settings are actually available to us. So here we have appearance tools, which we've already enabled. And that as a bulk thing should enable color, radius, style, width for borders, color link, spacing, we get block gap, margin, and padding. And for typography, we get line height. So each of these top level items will be a separate settings section. And you'll see a little bit what that looks like as we go along. So we have enabled this, which means that basically what that means is, let me do this. We're going to go into the site editor. And we're going to edit our site, and we're going to go into a block. We need a block that will have some settings. Actually, the better place to go for this particular demonstration is going to be in a post. So we're going to go in here. We're going to see if we want to convert these classic blocks to be real blocks. The classic blocks were there because I used a demo content creator. It's called Faker Press. And what that does is it just imports a bunch of HTML content, and WordPress sees that as a classic block. And so I've just created blocks from the classic block. But I don't necessarily need to do that until we get to a point where we're editing the content. So, but now I am editing the content. So I'm going to go into this paragraph here, and let's see what we have available to us. So color, typography, and dimensions. So here we have padding and margin dimensions available. And a better one would probably be like a group block. So if I select all of these, let's say, oops, and I want to group them. So I'm going to put a group block around all of these. So see how it just popped in, and now I can expand it. And all those blocks that I had selected are just kind of like pop into that group. And now I can apply some styles to this group. So let's say this was going to be something I would use that was supposed to be called out from any other content on the page. I might like change the background to be black and the text to be white and the links to be white, and then it looks different from the rest. But I actually applied those styles to the group and not to the individual blocks within the group. Okay, so with that, we have padding here, so I can change the padding. And we have block spacing here. I can change the block spacing. Let's take those off. I'm going to update this post. And then I'm going to go back into my theme.json, and I'm going to change my appearance tools to false. And now if I reload this page, and I open list view and choose my group, now some of those options have gone away because I've disabled them. So if you are creating a theme that's going to be going out to a client, this is a really good example of when you might want to not enable this. You're sending it to a client. You don't want them to be able to change the margins. You don't want them to be able to change the padding, that sort of thing. Then you would actually want to not have that enabled. But if you're sending a theme out to a bigger audience, like publishing it to the WordPress theme directory, you're less likely going to be disabling these settings. So that isn't necessarily universally true, but in general, you're probably going to need to keep it open if you have a lot of people using it, because they're going to want the flexibility to work with it. But you can also enable and disable all of these things on a per block basis, not like per block in your content, but in a global block. Anytime this block is used, these features can be turned on or off. All right. So I'm going to change this back to true now, because I do want those appearance tools to be available. And now we're going to go down back to our living reference, and we're going to keep going down the list. So, and that's what all of these supports do. They enable or disable this control, a design control, in the user interface. Something to know is that if you have this control enabled and it's set in a block, and then later it's disabled, the user interface piece will go away, but the setting that had been applied will still be there. So it's because it becomes part of the markup for that block. All right, so use padding aware alignments. Enables root padding. The values from styles, spacing, padding to be applied to the contents of full width blocks instead of the root block. This is a pretty new one, and I haven't really used this very much. And it doesn't tell me if it's defaulted to true or false. Okay. So I'm going to go dig into that later and see if use root padding aware alignments is true or false by default. I'm guessing it's probably false by default, because a lot of times we won't push big changes like this out to the world that could cause regressions for existing themes. So it's we would call that an opt-in option rather than an opt-out. So I think this is helpful though, because I know that for me, when I am building something that's full width, I don't necessarily want everything to go like way out to the edges. I want to have some padding there. So I think in my past I would have found this to be really helpful. So, but I want to play with that sometime. Border. So this is all of the border options are part of the appearance tools. So these have all been set to true already. So I don't need to do anything here. Shadow is pretty fun. If I go ahead, let's enable shadow. Is that right? Shadow is its own top level thing. Oh, it's not enabling shadow. This is actually a setting to do presets for shadow. Okay, so I don't want to do that. Turn the Gutenberg plugin on. Yeah, I have Gutenberg on. That's Ryan is helping me in the chat. Let's see. Gutenberg is on. It's just I'm going through the docs, so I was expecting to find a supports option here to enable or disable shadows. So yeah, so shadow was just enabled, just released. Let me see if you know what? I should probably update Gutenberg. All right. It's not going to do anything in this here in the theme JSON as far as the schema goes, but in the docs it's giving me the indication that you can add presets for shadow, but it doesn't appear, at least in the docs, that we can set a true false to enable or disable the option. So I don't know if that's actually true. But we'll see. And I also don't know what blocks can you actually apply a shadow to at this point. Usually the group block is what seems to get all the new things. So let's see what we can find here. I want to see if I can figure this out. Okay, so I'm back in a post. I'm looking at a group, and there's nothing here that indicates shadow. So at this point, my options would be to dive into the code and see what might be in the code that actually parses out the theme JSON, which I've done a lot of times to try to figure out what new things have landed. And the other option that I could do is go back to GitHub and find PRs related to this new feature. So let's find core. We're going to go look for what's new in 14.9. So every Gutenberg release, we have a release post. And this just was published today. So this is 15.0. And it'll tell you basically everything that's been changed. So this is a carefully written document that is put together with the work of a lot of people. But we have basically the highlights, the big things that are added in to each version. And then down below, we get a full change log that's, kind of separated out by what area of the plugin it's affecting, or if it's an enhancement or bug or just code quality or documentation related things. So if you're looking for a way to stay up to date on what's happening in Gutenberg and what will, ultimately land in core later, these posts are a really good way to do that. They're big, it's a lot, but it's at least gives you like a clue of whether or not something might be interesting for you. So if I look through the enhancement section, for example, let's see if we can find something that's interesting. So add paste styles to the block settings. This is kind of a cool thing, actually, because you can do kind of like an apply formatting thing from one block to another. But that's the way that we can really keep up on things. So every 2 weeks, and it's a every 2 week commitment instead of an every minute basically commitment to try to keep up with every PR that is merged into trunk of Gutenberg. All right, so but I wanted to look at the 14.9 one. let's see, Gutenberg new tag. All right, so this is the link. Put this into chat for those that are interested. If you're interested in staying, just seeing that one category of posts on the core, make core blog. But I would like to go back to the 14.9. All right, and let's see if shadow. All right, so it's an opt-in feature, looks like. All right, let's go find the PR and see if we can figure out how to enable it. Okay, so we can put setting shadow and then a palette of shadows. That's kind of cool. It's a little like color palettes. So instead of color here, it's shadow. But what I really want is the support. I wonder if you maybe need, this is not typically how things are added. Typically we would have something that would enable or disable. All right, so here we go. We've got shadow palette is set to null. These are the defaults. This is how shadow is defined from the beginning. And then default palette is also null. So I wonder if I can set the default palette to true there, and that might work. All right, let's see. Always an adventure. Going back to the PR. I'm gonna try dropping this whole block of code in from the PR. Oops, I got too much. Still have too much. Too many tabs, but that's not functional, so I'm gonna let it go. All right. Group, color, typography, dimensions, box space, shadow. No shadow. So maybe it's not on the group, on the... It is possible that it isn't on any blocks yet. So they have to, the control has to be in blocks. Oh, let's try it on a button, because that's the example that's in here. Okay. Let's add a button. There it is. Okay. Okay, so we have buttons. We have a button. Okay, I think I remember now. There's no UI for this yet, so it's not a control that you can set in the user interface, but I think that we could take the rest of the code for the styles, which I wasn't really planning on doing anything in styles today, but we're gonna do it anyway. That might be the only way we can see this working. All right, so this theoretically should apply this shadow preset that's called Shadow Natural, which is this one here. Preset that up, Shadow Natural. Oh, okay, it's one of the presets, not one of the palette items. Okay. So this is a theme developer only feature right now. Assuming I am right. I completely forgot to save that before I reloaded it. Buttons. Now I'm looking to see if there's anything on here that would indicate a drop shadow. And there sure isn't. Okay. Why is that broken? User error. Yeah, it would be hard to. Somebody said that it'd be tough to see a shadow on top of the black background. That's true, but it's not there right now. So, and I think that it's not there partly because I have not done my work correctly. So there it is, box shadow. So now let's try putting it against white so that we can potentially actually see it. So we'll just move this, try to move this out of the group, or we just change our group settings back to default. Okay, did update that, right? Oh, this is a preview. Okay. Let's try actually loading the right thing. Oh, look at that. There are some cool little drop shadows. They're actually there. That's pretty cool. Once there's a UI for this, it's going to be huge for theme designers and site builders that are building more in the site editor than in code. But honestly, we're all gonna have to learn to adjust to building in the site editor more and more, because things are so much easier to manipulate if you can use the interface, user interface. Yeah, so that's cool. I think that if I were to remove this whole shadow section, it would still work, because these are this is a theme specific palette. So you can create whatever shadows you want to have using regular CSS in here, like the shadow here, and you would use whatever not the selector, but the CSS4 selector would go in here. So it should be formatted in a way that would work. So this one looks like it's, it's got 5 pixels, 5 pixels, 0, and then -2, and then it's got white, and then it's got this, which then has black. So I don't have the shorthand for shadow stored in my memory, so, but I think that's amazing. I am curious though. Let's see what what actually lands into the CSS, because sometimes you have to do some browser compatibility stuff for box shadow. So it doesn't look like there's anything browser specific happening in the CSS. It's just box shadow and then the variable. So if a browser doesn't support this box shadow standard, then it would not show the box shadow. But hopefully most visitors would be using a more modern browser. I know that that's not always true. Okay, let's carry on. Okay, shadow. We've got color options. So when you get to color, we get a mix of supports, which are all of these ones that say the type of Boolean or default is true or false. So let's go ahead and look at colors. So in your settings for colors, one of the things that you'll do is determine things like how you want duotone gradient and your color palette to be populated, which would be your presets, and also whether or not you would like people to be able to work with it and how. So if you set, if you set background to true, it's going to enable or disable the option to set a background color where a block supports that control. If you set custom to false, this is actually if you really want to lock down your options for your user. We're gonna spend a little time in this color section here. Okay, so right now custom is set to true, and if I go into my post editor here, I can say, if I click on anything that's got a color option, it will give me this checkerboard transparent background that I can click on, and I can set a custom color. Okay. Okay, I'm going to undo that. If I set this to false, though, and I go to do the same thing and I select this item, now that checkerboard has gone away. So if you don't want your end users, your content creators, your site admins to be able to pick any color in the world, you can disable that. So that's for client work. That's could be huge if you have a site that's got a really strict branding guideline of you should only be able to use these colors. And even more, you can set it so that you can only use these colors on these blocks. So if it's a heading block, it can only be XYZ color, because you can create specific palettes for each block too, which it starts to get a little involved in your theme JSON, but it's very helpful, I think, if you're doing a lot of corporate level or enterprise level design work. Having that control over what people will be able to do can be a real lifesaver. So, all right, so that's custom. Now we are going to leave it to be true. You don't have to have this in there because it actually defaults to true, but you can. All right, let's go ahead and look at background. Now, you may notice that when I use that tooltip, I don't know if you can actually see this. Okay, so I'm going to do that again. When I set background, so it's in this pop-up as soon as I do the double quotes, this is where the schema comes in. It selects the first thing on the item, which is background, and over here to the left, it shows me the little tooltip about that item. So if you're trying to figure out what all these things do, these tooltips can be helpful. So this says allow users to set background colors. If you click on that or hit enter in VS Code, which is the text editor or the IDE that I'm using, it'll populate with the default for that item. So in this case, background is default to true. So what I added here didn't actually do anything yet. But if I want to disable the background, I can say false. And this is going to apply to every block at this point. So anything that's using the core WordPress background option, you see I can see background here now, but if I reload this, and then choose it here, that should have disabled. Save. Sometimes things end up caching at the WordPress end for theme JSON, and then you have to kind of wait a minute for something to take effect. But I don't know why that didn't work. What should have happened, I think, is that the background... Oh, I see now. It did disable it, but only for color, not for gradient. So this is the gradient view. So let's see. I'm going to make sure that I'm right about that. Reload. Background. Okay, and now we have solid and gradient options. I got confused because this tab goes away when there's only one option. So you can actually keep gradients enabled for backgrounds, but not solid, and probably vice versa. Fascinating. Okay, so let's move on from there. Next, well, we can just keep going down this list. Custom duotone. So this is where we could say, well, do we want to allow people to create their own duotone styles? And we can say true or false here. And in every case where you have this true false, it's basically saying, do you want me to give the user this option in the user interface? You can, as a theme developer, you can still make use of these things in theme.json, even if they're disabled for the user interface. So for the theme supports, it's really about who's going to be working in the editor, who's going to be working in this view. And that's where the controls get either enabled or disabled. So we talk about, on the project, we talk a lot about gradual adoption. These are the kinds of things that can help with gradual adoption. I don't want to just like unleash everything. And also curating the editor is another term that we use. That's the same, a little bit of a different nuance that we can allow different things for different clients or different users. All right, so the next one down is custom gradient. That's the same thing as, so custom, just custom alone is about custom colors in the color picker. Custom duotone is about custom duotones where you have a color 1, color 2, and then you can apply it to images predominantly. Custom gradient can be applied to all kinds of things. But you could set a start and stop color and where exactly, there are different settings for gradients if you want to create custom gradients. If you don't want to allow people to create custom gradients, so this would be the place to do it. And then we go into all of the default options. Oops. So now we have default duotone, default gradients, and default palette. And what these three are going to say whether or not you want the WordPress defaults to come in. These are the defaults for these three options that are part of WordPress. So so the defaults are what show up here, and it'll say defaults. So this is the default WordPress color palette. These are all named colors, named as descriptive of the color that they are. So if you didn't want these colors to be here, let's say you didn't want people to be changing their text to be orange on white, you can change the default palette to false. Reload that without saving it. And now when I go to text, all I have is the custom color option because I have that enabled. So you would not want to do that probably unless you do have a theme level palette, which we do not have yet. All right. Okay, so duotone is not a preset, so we're not going to talk about that yet. Gradients is also not a preset. Link is a preset, and I think it's a part of appearance tools. Yes. So setting link color is part of appearance tools. It's the only option under the color settings. So while it is false by design, it has been enabled for my theme by setting appearance tools true. Now, if I wanted everything in appearance tools to be true except for link, I can override it by putting this in. So right now, if we have a link, which we don't, just make a dummy link. All right. Give it a color because I can't see a white on white. The white link was from before when I had made a black background and white text, so I didn't fix the link portion of it. So if I wanted to make it so that people cannot change the link color, we'll update that. Okay, edit. And now if I go back into my link again, you can see that the link color option is missing. The red stayed because I had already changed it before I disabled that. So the color doesn't go away if you disable the control. You just can't change it to something else easily. Okay. Okay, and then the last of the presets, or sorry, the last of the supports options is text, of whether or not you want people to be able to change the color of their text. And it's very similar to link. If I change that to false and then reload, then if I select a paragraph, now we can only change the background. So if I were going to put these in an order that makes sense to me, I'd probably put the 3 customs together, the 3 defaults together, and then the 3 color supports together. And that gives you an idea that you've got 3 groupings of supports in here that are all kind of doing the same thing. We've got enabling and disabling the option to set customs, to display the defaults, and then to enable or disable the options to change the colors of those 3 things. When it comes to the defaults, while this does remove the view of those default colors that come with WordPress, it does not remove them from the CSS that goes out to the front end. So those colors will still, and variables for those colors and gradients and duotones will still be available on the site. They just won't have an interface to work with them. So that is that. All right, so that's all of the preset, or sorry, I keep saying this. That is all of the supports options for the color section. So we could go on to the next section now. Oops. And for that, I don't want to go into block settings. So if you use the block settings, you're talking about setting settings on blocks. So you would say what block it is, and then you would have all of the same options that you have at the main settings level, you can apply to those specific blocks. All right, so the border options are all part of the, they're all part of appearance tools. So you wouldn't, unless you wanted to get really granular, you probably would not do these ones. Okay, and then from border custom, let's do spacing next. Spacing is, you have to really, this is getting into nitty-gritties now. It's powerful, but it can take a lot of work to learn exactly how these things are going to affect your site. And part of it is that it's simplified here, but it's using a lot of I don't know, automation might be a word, to allow for whether it's going to use one version of like Flex or Grid or Block or whatever, how it's going to actually translate out to the front end based on what's there. So it's very dynamic, some of these things. But as far as enabling block gap, that is enabled by appearance settings. Custom spacing size allows users to set custom space sizes. I wonder when that landed. I don't remember seeing this one before. It could have been a while ago. I haven't done a deep dive into seeing what all of the things are for a while. actually know what that does. That might be a topic for a future thing. I think, in all honesty, I think the spacing is an area that deserves its own attention, except for margin and padding. Those are pretty straightforward. Do you want to allow users to set their own margins and paddings on blocks that have that option available? Yes or no? And I don't remember if it's yes. It is enabled by appearance settings or appearance tools. So block, gap, margin, and padding are the three. So we'll likely come back to spacing another time. This is brand new. Use root padding aware alignments. And the content that's been added into this is a little bit more expansive than usual. So we usually don't get this much of a description of what these things are. Enables root padding to be applied to the contents of full block widths. Oh, okay, we looked at this in the docs briefly. So using this setting should always be set as an object with top, right, bottom, and left values declared separately. So that actually adds some complexity to this, because it's saying you have to do that. If you're going to enable this, you also need to separate out your padding options into four discrete values rather than having a shortened version that just uses one. So we're not going to do that right now. Typography. So let's see what options we have for typography. Okay, blocks and custom would be to set typography settings specific to blocks and specific to custom, or to apply custom typography values. We don't want to do that right now. Oh, this is not correct. Wow, I have a typo in here and it's changing everything. Okay. Schema is only as smart as its user. Okay, so there are lots of things available to us in the typography section. And this is another area that I think deserves its own attention, but just know that there's a ton that you can start to do if you dive into theme.json in terms of the fonts that you use. There you can load local font files from your theme directory and then give them names and then allow them available in the user interface. There's lots of stuff. And just in terms of typography, you can allow things like underlines and strike throughs and setting custom line heights and what the letter spacing should be. Lots of interesting things to do for typography. It really expands what you can do out of the box to really refine your design. So, all right. So that would be typography. Or is there anything else I wanted to look at here today? What is that? I don't have anything in it. Will it work? Why am I getting a squiggly line there? I know why. Didn't we already do a shadow? I must have taken it out. Oh, it's just the presets. Okay. I did take that out. right. So if it was kind of a crazy day, but if you had any questions, this would be a great time to bring them up. We talked about lots of design controls, enabling and disabling today, which I think is probably enough for today. I'm going to go ahead and commit all this to my repo today, but just for demonstration purposes, most of this we're going to take back out again. It's not going to land on our final starter theme because we probably wouldn't want to define things as their defaults in the theme JSON. We would like to just let that be inherited from WordPress. All right, so thank you all. I think that's it for today, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend and that you're staying warm or cool, depending on what part of the world you're in. And I will see you next time.